When I was younger, a group of friends and I longboarded in a nature park near my house. This nature park had a lake that was bordered on one side by a walkway with lights maybe every 50 feet or so. We were standing maybe 3 lights from the end, throwing bread into the water for ducks when we decided to leave. So we start kicking, and I'm at the back of the line when I turn around and notice in the last ray of light, maybe 40 or 50 feet away, a woman in a white dress with black hair walking towards us. She crossed her arms like she was cold, and I stared at her for maybe 4 or 5 seconds when she looked at us and then came at us in a dead sprint. We start laughing, thinking someone is just messing with us, but we start kicking pretty hard. Now, it's important to note that if you push hard on a longboard going downhill, you can easily go 15 to 20 miles per hour. So we were all laughing or something when I turn around again, and this woman catches up to us. We had never seen anyone run so fast for so long, and we all panicked a bit and started kicking as hard as we could. At this point, we were going between 20 and 25 miles an hour, and as we hit the last light, I dared to turn my head again and noticed that this woman was only about 15 feet behind us, and her features were really exaggerated. Her arms were too long, her hands were huge, and her fingers looked like they had extra joints or something. I couldn't see the details of her face either, but she was silently walking in step with my friends and me. The nature park had what we called a promenade that connected it to the neighboring areas where I lived, and we tried our best to. She was maybe 5 feet behind me when we hit the woods on the embankment, and as soon as we did, she just stopped in place, like she stopped immediately. No sound, no breathing, nothing. We went maybe 50 feet down before we stopped and looked at the thing, and it stood there for a minute and then turned and went into the nearby woods. But then she crouched behind a tree and stuck her head out, watching us. Needless to say, we got out of there quickly. My friends and I only talked about it once, and my buddy, who was standing in front of a line of friends who were kicking, he kicked so hard to get away that he put a hole in his shoe. If any of you have any idea of what might have been haunting us that night, I'd love to hear it. I live in a pretty rough neighborhood. I have 4 other housemates, but they are all away for the holiday season. We are students. For Christmas, I was given one of those doorbells that have a camera in them. I attached it to the frame on the outside of my door, which looks out onto the old pub, and a couple of days later, the postman rang the doorbell, which was nice and worked well. However, a couple of days later, on my way home from work, I noticed that the bell had been stolen. I hadn't even thought about it, but of course it had to be stolen, right? I was annoyed but not surprised by what I mean, but this is where it gets scary. Last night my phone rang at the door. It was very late and I was still alone in the house, but the screen was dark and it was just a picture of my house, which meant that the person who stole it was sitting outside filming my house on my own doorbell. I was very moved by this. The terrain is quite rough and I have been attacked and robbed before. Vidaris quickly turned black, as if the culprit had put the doorbell in his pocket or something. I peeked through the curtain to where I thought the man was renting the house, but no one was there. I was a teenager in the 90s, and on this night I found myself downtown. It was around midnight when I finally found a semi-well-lit bus stop, looked at the bus schedule, and realized I was late for the last bus of the night, if it wasn't too late. So I decided to wait a bit on the bench to see if the bus would come. A few moments later, a tall man came and sat next to me. He had plenty of room to sit elsewhere, mind you, but he snuggled nice and close. He was dressed in all black, including a black leather jacket, and started talking to me calmly, and I finally looked at him, and he was very dark. Had shiny, wavy black hair and really orange eyes, like bright hazel orange snake eyes that contrasted with his dark features. Ease in clothes. I know this is going to sound a little weird, but he really did look like the devil. He took off his leather jacket and put it on my lap to keep me warm. I took it off and gave it back to him and said, "No thanks." He kept putting it on my lap, and I looked around for other people, only to see a homeless man who had passed out, sleeping on a bench. He tried to get me to give him a ride because it's so late and he's worried about me and my bus isn't coming and I'm not safe. I said no thanks. My bus should be here any minute. In my mind, I didn't know if the bus would actually be here, but the streets were dead and dark, and I was afraid to leave this one well-lit place. After what seemed like an eternity, My bus finally arrived. It was the most beautiful bus I have ever seen. I quickly got up and said my bus has arrived, and he smiled at the bus and muttered to himself, "How lucky you are." I got on the bus and saw out the window that he was walking to his car in a dark parking lot across the street from the bus stop. He was standing next to his car, waving me over to him as if that would change my mind. I was a wild teenager who played a lot, and I stayed out in the city center until all hours of the night and thought I was invincible. But after that incident, I never stayed out late again, especially alone. I really think I got really lucky that night, and I had no intention of pushing it again. It happened last year in May, and I was 15 years old and in 10th grade of high school. My high school has an afternoon program for 9th and 10th grade, and that meant that my classes started at 12 p.m., and sometimes I finished at 5 or 6 p.m., rarely at 7 p.m. For 3 days, May 25th, 26th, and 27th, I was at East European Comic Con, which was really far from home and on the other side of town. To get there from home, I had to use the subway, about 9 stations, and the bus, about 6 stations. Since the first day of the convention was on the 25th, a Friday, I went straight from my high school with my best friend Mary and only stayed for 3 hours. I didn't want to come home late, and to be honest, I was really exhausted because I finished my class at 5:30 p.m. Also, the roads are very congested on Friday evenings. Everything was good, and I came home very happy because I had a lot of fun. The next day was the 26th, and it was a Saturday and usually a weekend. The metro is 10 times more empty, and the roads are busy only in the evening. So I met my friend at the bus station in the morning at 9 a.m., and we went to the convention together. We met other friends there and stayed for about 11 hours, and she had to wait for her mom to come and pick her up. My parents insisted that I had to take public transport home. They said this because they thought it would be inconvenient for her parents to pick me up. Obviously, my parents regret it now. However, everything was fine on the bus home. I listened to music, browsed Facebook, and just went about my business. When I got to the subway, it was completely empty, and there were hardly any people to be seen. It was around 8 p.m., so it wasn't a big surprise. But because I had to transfer to the carriageway, I still had to walk about 5 minutes on the subway to get to the train that goes to the station closest to my house. While I was waiting for the train, a man starts walking around me. He was in his late 30s and looked quite unwell, with red, swollen eyes and dirt on his hands and face. First, he passed me 3 times, mind you, and I felt like he was walking in circles around me or something. On instinct, I put my phone in my pocket, took off my headphones, and turned them off. The train arrived in about 4 minutes, and honestly, it felt like an eternity. I sat down and tried not to panic while he sat down next to me. We were alone in the subway car, and I thought to myself, why would you sit next to me when there are just a lot of empty seats? There was an old man sitting at the other end of the train, and I wanted to go up to him to feel a little bit safer. And when I got up, this dude literally grabbed my arm and pulled me hard, and I fell on my back. He started smiling and said, "If you don't sit here next to me, it's going to be a bad girl." And at that moment, I started to cry. I tried to stay calm and react normally. I nodded and he let go of my hand, during which time I got a really good look at him. He was wearing ripped jeans and a t-shirt with holes, as well as a denim jacket. And he started asking me questions. How old am I? What is my name? Where am I from? What's in my bag? All kinds of questions. He also spoke aggressively, and I didn't know what to do. When he saw that I did not answer, he mumbled something and then spoke about his interests. Norse gods and Norse mythology, and I don't know what made him talk about it, but I just sat and listened. At this point, almost 10 minutes had passed, and I felt like I had no way out. I heard footsteps, and at that moment I looked up and realized that the train was almost reaching the second to last station. Footsteps came from the old man I saw earlier, and he looked at me and said, "Where have you been? I called you and texted you for several hours. Come on, we need to go home." I breathed a sigh of relief and heard the dude mumble something again. Before the train stopped as well, he asked me if I wanted to give him my phone number so we could talk again. I told him I couldn't and that I just had to go. The old man glanced at him and we got off the train together. We started to walk towards the exit, and when we saw that the train had left the station, we stopped. He looked at me and said, "Is this your station? Are you okay? Did he hurt you? Is there anything I can do for you?" I saw him reach for you and I heard him talk and I thought you might need some help. I told the man that I had exactly one station left and that I was fine and just a little scared. He advised me to speak to the security guard and tell him what had just happened, which I did. However, I continued to thank the old man for what he had done for me, got on the next train, and texted my father and told him to pick me up from our metro station immediately. About 4 minutes later, I got off the train and was at my station, and as I was walking up the stairs to get to the exit, I heard someone yell, "You lying bitch!" I didn't have time to turn around because I was knocked down, and I gave a loud scream and started crying and started moving as if to get the man off of me. Because I was talking to that guard at the other station, thank God there were 2 more guards waiting for me. They had a taser, and when they heard my scream, they rushed and helped me up and put the man on the ground. I was told to call the police and wait for someone to take me home, and I told them my dad was upstairs outside the subway, and I just ran to my dad and told him everything, and he called the police. A man was arrested, and we did speak to someone from the media for a short time, but they refused to publicize the case because the man was a gypsy, and it would be racist to shame his ethnicity and show the bad side of that minority. To this day, I wonder what was going through his mind and what would have happened if the old man hadn't been there. This experience still haunts me. I don't know exactly what happened, and I live in a very safe area, which just makes it even scarier because it shows that you never know what might lie underneath. So my nephew is about 5 years old. I was asked to babysit him for the night, and I was young at the time and didn't know how to watch a baby, so I decided to put on Netflix for a few hours. We went to the kids section of Netflix and started watching some show about talking cars or something. It was around 5 p.m., so there was sunlight outside and there was a sliding glass door perpendicular to the sofa, and the curtain on the door was open. I was sitting on the couch with my nephew as we watched TV together. My nephew also really liked the show, so we kept watching. This went on for several hours until it was dark outside, and in my foolishness I turned on the light but never closed the curtain. It was one of those things that other people can see, but all you see from the inside is the darkness of the night. My backyard is adjacent to a large field, so there are no streetlights or anything, and suddenly, I heard one of the deck chairs being dragged across the deck. I recognized the sound immediately and just assumed it was my parents. Why they would come home and then silently go outside to move the deck furniture in the middle of the night was beyond me. Like I said, it's a safe neighborhood. We watched TV for maybe an hour until it was time for bed, and when I put my nephew to bed, I realized my parents were home and asked them who was on deck, but they both denied ever going out on deck, and that scared me a little. So I went into the kitchen and turned on the deck light, and from the window, I saw that the chaise longue had been dragged from its usual place behind the outside table, about 5 or 10 feet to the sliding glass door. The chair was directly opposite the window, less than a foot from the glass, but directly in front of the opening in the curtain. From where he was, the man had a great view of me and my nephew, and the chair was standing there like someone had just pulled it up and sat down, like we were in a show or something. I never noticed anyone outside the window or felt like I was being watched or anything, which, I don't know, makes it creepier in a way. But it gets worse. The next day I went out to look and found 2 large handprints with fingers spread on the bedroom window. My bedroom window was on the first floor. Luckily, this room used to belong to my brother, and he had some problems with girls getting in, so my parents installed pretty good locks to the point where the window just couldn't be opened. To this day, I have no idea what happened. Several years have passed since then, with no further signs of Tom's snooping, but it's safe to say that the incident shook me to the core, and I no longer leave the curtains open at night. It happened years ago, and I still get chills when I think about it. Actually, I was in 8th grade then. It was late at night, and I was lying in bed just trying to sleep. It was summer, and it was very hot outside, so I opened the bedroom window. I had a screen on my window to keep the bugs out as well. Suddenly, I heard some faint knocking in the house under my window. It woke me up from my sleep, and I called my mom, whose bedroom was down the hall, and she came into my room and turned on the light. I said I heard something outside. She replied something like, "Just go back to sleep, it was probably just the wind." So I eventually fell asleep. The next morning I woke up as usual and went about my day, and in a few hours we were all going to play somewhere as a family. I forgot where we were going, and as we were walking out the door to our car, my dad says, "Why are the stairs attached to the house?" We all looked around and saw the ladder leaning against my bedroom window. My mom started freaking out and ran to my room and looked at my window, and after inspecting my window, she noticed that the window screen was cut as if someone put a knife to it, and then it clicked. The noises I heard the night before in front of the house were someone trying to bring a ladder up to my window and cut the screen. They must have heard me wake up and call my mom or something and got scared and just ran away. But this incident gives me chills to this day, because I often wonder, what if I hadn't woken up? What if they got into my bedroom? What would happen? Nothing like this had ever happened to me or my family before, so I was very scared and I didn't sleep for weeks. I kept the window closed and locked at all times, even when it was too hot. I have no idea who it was, and we haven't had any incidents since. My parents also live in the same house, but it was very scary. When I was working for a vegetable grower in Humboldt County, Northern California, I used to go solo camping and stuff like that. At that point, I had several thousand hours in the woods. However, being an East Coast person, I am quite paranoid. I always carry a compound bow, not for hunting, but just so you know, in case you need it. At that time, I had practically no gun permit. That evening, I built a fire in the tent under a rocky ledge. I smoked a cigarette and just chilled, and at one point I just dozed off, but I was woken up by something moving on two legs. I'm always up for a quick fix. If needed, I could leave my S-bag and tent and be out in seconds. However, I lay there for a few minutes just listening to what was making a wide spiral around my campsite, and it was slowly getting closer as well. Before I sat down, I determined the bug's exit route, and when the sounds were opposite the route, I grabbed my pack and bow and flew up to the ridgeline where I could get the best vantage point. I'm sure I was pretty loud, so everyone there must have heard me. I climbed to the top of the steep slope behind me, so I was sure nothing could catch me behind, and I lay down flat to see where I'd just been. I lay there for several minutes, and that could still see the light from the embers of my fire in front of my tent. A few minutes later, I saw something, either a man or something on two legs, pass through my camp between the tent and the fire. At that moment, I thought of putting the arrow down to try to hit her, but as the thought crossed my mind, a 40 or 50-pound rock landed about 5 feet from my head. I can't explain it, but at the time, I felt it was a message. I felt that whatever threw that rock was much bigger, stronger, and faster, letting me know that I didn't belong in this place, and if Watt or anyone else wanted me dead, I would. And obviously there were more than one, too. At that point, I dashed down the opposite slope and headed as fast as I could for the Ranger Fire Lookout Tower, which I knew was several miles away. In my haste, I never found it. And to make a long story short, the rest of the trip was uneventful. As soon as I got home, I had a great story, and I told a few people, and apparently where I was, some Indian friends said the area was off limits, and I was clearly told to leave. I don't know if I believed them, but supposedly the spirits of the previous inhabitants wandered there at night. Anyway, this is my story, and I still don't know what to make of it, but I guess take that as you will. I was small, 7, 8 years old. My mother and stepfather took me with them to visit a friend. The adults hung out in this guy's garage, and I had to play with the other kids outside. The only time we went into the house was when someone needed to go to the bathroom. I would never go there by myself, because I always wanted my mom to go with me. The bathroom was at the top of the stairs, and the house was kind of old, and I remember it was a lot of fun because it had one of those lift chairs, and sometimes we had to ride it up to the bathroom. The chair belonged to the boy's mother, who actually lived with him. She was very old, with more white hair, and she was always sitting on the couch in the living room across from the stairs watching TV. And she never spoke or looked at you when you came in, and I always assumed she was just deaf or senile. A couple of years ago, I was talking to my mom about this guy's house and how scared I was to go in there alone. I told my mom that there was always that old lady sitting in the living room, and she never looked at us, and it was very creepy. My mom opened her eyes wide and said, "What old lady?" Apparently, the boy's mother died a few years ago, before we started going there, but I know I saw her every time too, and I can tell you every detail of how she looked, down to her clothes and the brown crocheted afghan she always wore over her shoulders, and my mother and I were a beautiful match. Fed up with it. She also told me a story that day about how she was once in the upstairs bathroom in the same house and heard someone come up the stairs and turn the bathroom door handle. She screamed for just a minute, then looked out the window to the left of the restroom and saw that everyone standing outside in the yard was everyone at the party. She zipped up very quickly and jerked the door open, but no one was there. I'd like to go back to this house when I'm an adult. But unfortunately, the guy who lived there moved out, and we don't know the people who live there now. So I guess that's all the information I'll have get. So, for context, I'm a 25-year-old female from the UK. But this story takes place when I was about 12 years old. I guess it starts with us moving into a new house. But the house, it wasn't your stereotypical creepy house. It wasn't that old and quite modern, but it didn't take long before we started to feel that the place was just out of place. It started off pretty tame, like the feeling of being constantly watched and stuff like that. But it soon escalated. To be honest, a lot of strange things have happened in this house, but I will talk about the 3 worst experiences. So the house was extended at some point. A couple of rooms were added to the side of the house. This annex upstairs belonged to my father and his girlfriend, and they also had a bathroom. The weird or stupid thing, though, is that when they built this extension, they didn't extend the attic, so we had the original attic over the old part of the house. But the part over my father's room was bricked up, so there was just an empty space you could not physically gain access. Anyway, one night my dad and his girlfriend were just lying on the bed cuddling, or so I was told, when evidently they heard footsteps directly above them in the barred attic. 4 or 5 loud footsteps were heard, followed by some sort of scuffle, followed by a loud crash and the sound of a man making an "ah," as if a man had tripped and fallen or something. And there was dead silence after that, but they couldn't look and see if there was anything there, could they? Therefore, my father's girl was very mad at this point and threatened to go back to her parents. So the following is difficult to explain as the layout of the house is relevant, so I hope it makes sense. So, down in the hallway, we had this thick glass vase that my dad filled with glass pebbles and attached to the wall. I want to note that it was very securely attached. Apparently, since he had kids at home, he made sure to keep this thing nice and secure on the wall. Luckily, I wasn't home the night it happened. I'm sure I was staying at either a friend's or my mom's. Anyway, it's like 3 a.m. and my dad and stepmom are asleep until they're woken up by a loud crash. They open their bedroom door and see shards of glass everywhere, so they put on their shoes and go to investigate. And it becomes clear that our beautiful decoration has been ripped from the wall and then broken, as if it had actually been ripped out, as if the screws were still in the bracket that held the vase. And they were huge, long screws. To top it all off, shards of glass are everywhere, literally in every room of the house. And sure, when you break something, the glass seems to go in crazy places, but this was something else. My bedroom only had a handful of large fragments, and to get from the hallway to my bedroom, I had to go up a spiral staircase, turn right at the top, walk 6 feet down the landing and turn right again. Somehow all that glass managed to fly up about 12 feet and around 2 90-degree angles. And this is simply impossible. The last incident, and of course no less important, occurred in my father's room and bathroom. So my father had a lock on his bedroom door, and he didn't actually put it there. It was there when we moved. He didn't use it at first, but then my brother started bringing a bunch of his friends over at lunchtime, and soon my dad started noticing money disappearing from his room, so he started locking the bedroom door when he left in the morning. It was also a regular occurrence for a while, when one day my dad comes home from work, unlocks the bedroom, opens the door, and finds blood on the bedroom carpet. It's obvious he's like, "What F is?" and investigates further, and there's even more blood. It's like a trail from the bedroom door across the room and into the bathroom and into the bathroom, and there's more on the carpet and loads just smeared all over the counters and the sink and the toilet and just everywhere. Dad's obviously a little crazy, but he's trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. I mean, did his girlfriend come home at lunch and have an accident or something? No. Did my brother or I manage to unlock the door while Dad was at work? No. He even began to think that maybe the cat had snuck up on a wounded animal or something the day before or something, so he looked everywhere for a small bird or rodent. But there was nothing, and we never solved the mystery of the blood, the glass, or the man on the roof. Anyway, I think we lived in this house for about 18 months in total. But the discovery came about a month after we moved. Dad is outside talking to a neighbor, and after a while she says something along the lines of, "Have you met your new friend yet?" At the moment, I don't think anything really crazy has happened, but we've already got an amazing vibe at home. So Dad asks her to explain, and it turns out that a few years ago, a teenager died in the house. I believe it was leukemia, and he was sick for a long time, and they decided to just bring him home to die. And so his parents soon left, and since then no one has stayed in the house for more than 6 months. Also, some additional random, fun, weird facts about this place. When we were decorating my brother's room, we took down the wallpaper and discovered that the guy had left a message under the paper. It's okay, but it was like Bob Joe was here in 2001 or something, but it was still pretty weird since we knew who he was at this point. We also learned from a neighbor that his family remodeled the living room for him when they bought him home, so he actually died in a very specific place in the living room. Absolutely the same place we put our snooker table, which my friends and I often turned into a den and slept under. About 4 years after we moved too, one of my high school friends moved, and we weren't very close. But he knew I used to live there, and that I had some amazing stories about the place. But his parents were non-believers, so it didn't bother them too much, and it turns out that between my move and his move, someone actually blessed the place, or whatever it was called, and that seemed to stop the madness. My friend is still adamant that the house is just unpleasant, and he often feels on edge, but luckily they haven't had any weird experiences. And here is my story. I hope you enjoyed it, and I apologize if it was a bit long. So I was about 15 at the time, and I was living in East Tennessee, and I still am. But I digress. I really enjoyed walking through this forest because all the fallen trees, patches, and mud pits made for a fun little obstacle course. The other thing that will be important later is that I'm also deeply interested in the paranormal and the occult and things like that. They've never scared me much. So, I went into the woods that day for a short walk, as it were. This time, however, I decided to go a little further than usual, and my house was just out of sight when I discovered something strange. And this something was a part of the forest on which absolutely nothing grew. There were no trees, no moss, no grass, no mushrooms, or anything else. This area was also shaped like a large oval, and I didn't notice any flaws in its shape. There was no sign that it was man-made either. So naturally, I just stood and stared at the strange patch of land. But it wasn't long after that things started to get a little weird. I started hearing some unnatural noise, and it sounded like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I could hear it with my ears and from the forest around me, and it was getting louder too. It took me a minute to identify the sound, but it sounded like a group of women harmonizing. At least that's how it seemed to me. Now, up until this point, I was a bit excited, to be honest, and I was and still am in love with the paranormal, and everything that was going on was clearly not a natural phenomenon. I wanted to stay and watch, but I guess whoever was there was telling me to leave. Soon the harmonizing filled my ears as well, and it actually started to get painfully loud. Despite this, I remained steadfast in my intention to stay there. But then, the strangest thing happened. Suddenly I got very scared, and without warning I rushed back in the direction of my house. I slogged through the slush and muck, not even trying to jump past them until I was back in my yard. As I stood there, covered in scratches and mud and blood, I realized that I wasn't actually moving my body. It was almost like I was on full autopilot or something. I mean, I knew very well what I was doing, but I wasn't telling my body to do it. I don't know. It's really hard to describe. But being stubborn, I actually tried to find the seat again, even though I was rightfully scared of it. But no matter how much I looked in that forest, I couldn't find that place anymore. This happened last week. It was around 11 p.m., and my city was in the middle of a severe storm with rain and cold nights. Just as I'm about to go to sleep, my wife tells me her van needs gas, and because I'm such a wonderful husband, I tell her I'll get dressed and take her van to the gas station so she doesn't need it first thing in the morning and in the rain. And what else? The streets are quite empty, and I don't go to the station closest to my house, but to the one further away, because it's cheaper there. It's been raining for a long time. Some of the streets are dark, and as I turn off the main road onto a side road that eventually leads to the second main road where the station is, I stop at the traffic lights. I just happen to look on the right side of the street, and there is a storm drain and the water flows into the drain quite well, and that part of the street is not too dark, as the light from the intersection was illuminating the area. Now that I'm looking, I see a black figure crawling towards the storm drain. At first, I think it's some kind of wreckage as it approaches the drain, but when I look and get closer, I see it has legs, a head, torso, and arms. He crawls into the storm drain and reaches down with his hands, holding onto the curb, and then just jumps up. I was like, what the hell is this? He looked bigger than a dog, but smaller than a child, I think. If I had to describe what I saw, I would say it looked like a monkey or something, maybe a fast-moving sloth. Either way, it was a humanoid, and it was amazing. Also, I definitely wasn't half asleep or drunk, and I know I wasn't imagining it. I don't live in an area with a lot of wildlife either. Just the occasional skunk, a possum, and coyote, and that's pretty much it. In any case, why would any animal just jump into a storm drain that has a lot of water flowing into it? It was strange, and looked like a human, but a tiny human, and I didn't know what to think. So last Sunday night, during the blood moon and lunar eclipse, a friend and I decided to drive up to this mountain, which is about 40 minutes from my town. We live in Northwest Washington, right on the border in some rural communities. This mountain also borders an Indian reservation that I will talk about later, and is now used for logging and has open access trails and everything. So a friend of mine was on this mountain about a year ago, and he swears he saw something in the trees that looked like a man, but far away, and it was gone before he could look again. So walking up this mountain, I was already thinking to myself, oh cool, I bet we're going to run into some Bigfoot shit or something. But I'm in awe of the great views, so it wasn't much of a problem. We reach this mountain and start climbing, and I immediately feel very uncomfortable, but I can't recognize. We probably spend a good hour on the road to the top, because for a small amount of time we get lost on side roads, and at this point I just don't feel a good vibe. There was one particular spot that gave me goosebumps. Usually when I have a bad vibe, I can feel around. I don't know if that makes sense, and I understand where it's coming from, but this time I just couldn't pinpoint it. Everything around caused me such a feeling. But we reached the top and had to turn around because our fools didn't realize they had closed the top lookout for the night and blocked the road with a gate, which in hindsight, we are both very grateful for. On the way down, I noticed that my friend was also visibly on edge, and he didn't believe in the paranormal at all and thought I was full of crap when I told him about my experiences. However, we both just wanted to get off this mountain, and we kept seeing something moving in the trees. But we couldn't tell if it was a trick of the shadows or not. It could very well be, mind you. When we were a good part of the way down, we stopped the car for a split second because there was a nice view from the road, and we wanted to at least see some since the summit was closed. So we stop, and we both hear this noise unlike anything I've ever heard. The sound didn't sound like any animal, and I spent the next day listening to different animal sounds to try to compare them, and nothing sounded like it. It sounded very aggressive and almost metallic, coming from right behind the car. Also, every time I was sure I ran into something, my eyes would start watering, and I would just cry. And as soon as I heard that sound, my eyes would start to fill with tears. I already knew something fishy was going on. We both just look at each other and can just feel this thing. I've never felt so much evil and hatred in my life. It felt like he was right behind us, and he just felt very big and very angry with us. Honestly, I've never been so full of sheer terror. So my friend screams, and he just throws it on the floor, and I instantly shine my phone light on the back seat, because I felt like whatever was there was right in the car with us, and I remember it was, damn it, when he was laying the floor and he said, "I don't know, but I don't ever want to hear about it." So I'm basically sobbing as we drag our asses down this mountain, and I'm trying to calm us down by talking about my history lesson or whatever, and we finally reach the road and we're going home, and I remember him turning to me and said, "I know exactly what you are talking about now. Now my friend is the biggest skeptic, and even he absolutely cannot explain what he heard and felt. However, we come back to him, flipping through his shit, and he starts looking at this mountain and the tribe that lives next to it. And I'm starting to wonder if his experience last year had something to do with it. And he immediately finds the local folklore of the local tribes associated with these creatures called stick Indians, which are evil forest or mountain spirits that resemble what we think of as Bigfoot. They mislead wayward travelers with eerie sounds, clicks, whistles, and more. However, I'm not too knowledgeable about this subject, so any additional information or ideas would be greatly appreciated. In any case, he is convinced that this is what we encountered, which certainly matches everything we experienced on this mountain. I also found a local post a few years ago about skinwalkers that detailed an experience very similar to ours on the same mountain. Now let me say that I have no idea what we're up against, so this is all just speculation. I just know how scared I was, and usually when something happens to me I freak out for a minute or two, and then I feel good and think it's actually cool. But this time I wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. I'm actually still very terrified and having trouble sleeping because all I can do is think about what happened. Everything we both felt was extremely negative and really aggressive. Now for the skeptics, we could definitely potentially both be idiots and nothing supernatural happened at all. I don't know about this one. The fear we felt was more than just being scared of something. It was filled with fight or flight mode, and I was completely overwhelmed by the sensation of that thing, and I never want to experience that again, and especially never go back on that mountain again. Even my friend had trouble with it, and like I said, he's the biggest skeptic I know. Anyway, do any of you have any thoughts, or are we just idiots? Did we run into a stickman or something else? The stick Indian theory makes the most sense to me since we were at a historic home, and maybe he was mad about his house being hacked and just wanted us out from there or something. Also, maybe the eclipsed blood moon caused a spike in supernatural activity or something. I don't know what it was, and I apologize for such a long and meandering post, but I'm also trying to figure it out as I write. Any thoughts, opinions, or similar experiences would be greatly appreciated. I haven't told this story to many people because it happened 22 years ago when I was just a naive 12-year-old girl who lost her focus. The friends I was talking about then probably didn't pay attention to them and certainly won't remember it now, so I won't change the names. And to be honest, that probably wasn't even his real name. So I'm from a big city in the north of England. When I was 12, my mom bought me my first cell phone for my birthday. I was picking on her all the time, so I was so happy, and I can't remember the brand, but she had an antenna, and all you could do was text and call on it. It was also a true brick of the phone. I remember one text was about 25p, and almost everyone I knew at that age had a phone too, so I didn't do much with it other than walking around pretending to be on the phone. Over the next few months, more of my friends also got phones and toll-free numbers for texters. I don't know if anyone will remember them, but it was a place where you could enter a code in the settings, and your text would be free and unlimited. This was huge, and with it came the game of changing the last digit of your phone number and sending text messages with different results. That's how I met Alex. He started texting me, and then it was innocent to me, and he told me he was a 24-year-old DJ in a nightclub living in Leicestershire, UK. I thought he was really interesting, and I didn't want him to stop talking to me, so I told him I was 14, figuring that was an acceptable age for a 24-year-old to talk to. He also called me often, but Mom and Dad are not heard. I wasn't stupid enough to realize that they wouldn't let me talk to him. We talked about school, about his work, about normal things, and I liked how he talked to me like I was an adult and interesting. After a few months of just innocent conversation, He asked if we could meet and that he would come to my place. I was nervous because I actually lied to him about my age and that he might not like me. So I told him that I had something to tell him and that I was actually 12. He called me and gently told me not to worry, that he didn't care, but he also had something to tell me. He was actually 30. Now I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but I didn't care. And from then on, he just texted me saying how much he wanted to kiss me, asking about my underwear, and generally a pervert. But being stupid and young, I found it flattering and went along with it. I haven't mentioned it before, but I was bullied badly in my early school years, and at the age of 11 or 12, I learned to apply makeup early and suddenly started getting a lot more positive attention from people. In other words, I was the perfect victim for such a person. Eventually we met and he came to my town about 2 hours from Leicestershire in an old navy blue car, picked me up around the corner from my house and took me to a pub. He was tall, with dark curly hair and rather large front teeth. I honestly don't remember much about him, and he bought me a lager, and we sat in the corner of this dirty pub, and he put his arm around me and told me how beautiful I was. At the time, I had no idea how wrong it was, and I was completely naive. And all I remember thinking was, I hope no one who knows my mum sees us. After a few drinks, we got back in his car, and he drove off in search of a quiet place. A police car was coming towards us on the way, and he suddenly became very irritated and demanded that I fasten my seatbelt and sit down. Obviously, this was disturbing, even in my 12-year-old mind. Eventually, we found a quiet spot and kissed a lot, although I wouldn't let him go any further no matter how hard he tried. Then I told him I wanted to go home because I was starting to feel dirty. That's the only way I can describe it, and it just isn't. He took me home, and I never saw or heard from him again. However, 12-year-old me wanted answers. So, after I texted and called his cell and didn't get an answer for a week or two, I called his landline that I saved in my phone from him calling me a few weeks ago, and the woman answered. When I asked Alex, she started asking who I was and what I wanted from him. I told her everything, and it turned out that she is actually his wife and they have 2 children. I didn't call again, I didn't hear from him again, and I practically forgot about him. I have a daughter of my own now. She is 8. And memories like this really bother me because I will destroy anyone who preys on her in the same way. I know many of you will say I was dumb, and yes, I was. I was a child. At the time, I didn't know what was wrong and what was right, and I didn't have a positive figure in my life to help me with that. It was very stupid of me, and very dangerous to do what I did. I'm a 16-year-old boy, and I don't really do any sports. I'm a computer programmer, gamer, and an avid comic book and movie enthusiast. That being said, to make up for my lack of physical activity, I work out at least 4 times a week to maintain a proper physique. I have a membership to a local 24-hour gym, and started going there 2 years ago. It's a pretty big facility. They have several floors, but I usually spend time on the main floor, which has a spacious room with all the equipment I need for training. I usually do a full body workout when I go, so I tend to use all the equipment as well. That being said, it started about last week. So after I finish my cardio, I go down to the padded area where people usually train for their abs and start my routine. I'm just doing a plank, and notice that the guy is supposedly looking at me. He was to my right and wearing sunglasses, so I doubted him, and chalked it up to him just looking at something else, since I couldn't see his eyes. Once I move on to the next exercise, it quickly leaves my head until I start doing squats. And here he very clearly stared at me. His head was turned in my direction, and there was nothing else to look at. Again, I give him the benefit of the doubt because maybe he was just thinking about something. However, that thought completely disappeared when he came over and touched me without asking, announcing that I was doing squats wrong, which of course I knew was complete nonsense. At this point, he had his hand on my buttocks, and let me also say that I was clearly underage. I don't look any older than 15, and everything about this situation was just not right, and I knew it too. But to be honest, I was also paralyzed. After I broke free, I thanked him and told him I got it. He smiled the most twisted and creepy smile ever, and he goes back to his area and continues to stare me down like a hawk stalking its prey. I stupidly don't report him or tell anyone about the situation, and yet I was very excited. I go back the next day and pray it's gone. But lo and behold, I see him sitting there again. wearing his hideous sunglasses. When he sees me, he gives me a creepy smile and waves. Mind you, I'm not reciprocating at all, and I just wanted to avoid a confrontation with this guy. I'm doing cardio with this incident, and when I get to the mat, he's not there, but in the middle of my workout, a guy just flops down next to me and says, "Hey buddy, how often do you go to the gym?" I was genuinely surprised and answered vaguely if I could. I put my headphones back in, hoping that would signal to him that I wasn't interested in talking. I start to push back, and out of the corner of my eye I see that the monster is just lying there analyzing me. He then decided to give me the anatomy of a bicep and started touching my arm, almost caressing it. I just awkwardly said okay and tried to be as cordial as possible because I didn't want to retaliate and potentially mischaracterize him or something. I go to this gym a lot and I don't want to get a reputation or anything like that. But then he started putting his hand on my crotch, and that's when I jumped up and just left. People around me looked confused, and a woman came up to me and asked if I knew the man, to which I said no. I still didn't report the guy because I was afraid I misunderstood what he was doing and that he was just trying to help me or something. The next couple of times I went, I didn't really see him at all. But yesterday things escalated to the point where I realized that this guy had evil intentions. So, I went back to the AB workout area, and the guy didn't confront me at all, but pointed his iPhone at me very suspiciously. It looked like he was taking pictures or recording me, and I was scared, but I couldn't say anything because as far as I knew, he was just reading an article or something. I was confused, but I just continued with my training. After training, I go to the locker room to wash my hands. People there tend to just walk around naked, which I find quite disgusting, but there's really no rule against it. So this sick creep is in the locker room and I'm cursing under my breath, and while I'm washing my hands, this bastard literally walks up behind me and says, "You gotta shower after practice, come with me, I'll help." I tell him to get out and that I'm going to report him to the gym and the police, and everyone else there hears it, and I don't know what happened to him there because I just got my ass out of there as fast as I could. I followed through on my threat and reported him to the gym, but I didn't have a name and there were no cameras in the locker room, so the only proof I have is that he touched me in the gym. I tell my father and he must be furious. My father goes to the same hall, and when I described the guy to him, he said he recognized who I was talking about. He said that the guy always talks to younger people in the gym and that it always scared him. And this is what we are doing now. We're going to file a police report pretty soon, and I'll let you guys know when there are more details. I've been listening to scary stories for a while, and while they aren't as extreme as many of the stories here, I keep thinking back to an encounter I had when I was a little girl around 9 or so. Since it's been almost 10 years, my memory of it is a little hazy, but some of it sticks in my mind forever. So it was a normal day, and for some reason I decided to go to a nearby forest to take some photos which I've never taken before. Now the forest is almost next to our house, and it's not very big, but there is an elementary school nearby, so the children often play there. It was a quiet day and probably the weekend, I think, so no one was around. At that time they made a proper running track around the forest, and I don't know why, but at that time the track was pure mud and impossible to walk on, so I took the old and smaller route, which worked better for me and my photos in terms of landscape anyway. I had barely made it into the forest and my neighbors were still clearly visible, and I only managed to take a couple of photos when I noticed someone standing behind me. I immediately felt a little uncomfortable, but only because I didn't like being seen taking random pictures in the woods. I decided to move a little further to continue taking pictures and noticed a man starting to follow me. I was scared by this, and my subconscious told me that there must be something wrong. So after a while, and at the point where the old and new paths converged, I jumped onto the new dirt path. It was hard to get in, but luckily I was wearing rain boots and they were completely soaked in mud. After walking for a while, I plucked up the courage to look behind me. About 60 feet behind me, I saw a middle-aged man just standing there looking at me. The moment seemed to last forever, but it was probably only a couple of seconds before he turned around and just quietly walked away. I stayed for a while before going, and I definitely didn't want to stay in the forest anymore. I walked along the muddy path, too afraid to get off it, and thought that perhaps the man had not followed me down that path because it was impassable. I finally got to my grandparents' house, as they lived very close at the time, and I sat there on their swing and quickly texted my best friend about everything that had happened. At that moment, I began to calm down, because I was crying all the time I was walking out of the forest. I came home and wasn't going to talk about it, but immediately burst into tears and told my mom. She calmed me down a bit and said that maybe it was just some older guy who lived next door and was wondering about the man walking in the woods. Her reasoning was that almost everyone here knew each other, and maybe he was just lonely or something. I never believed anything she said because the man never once raised his voice to say anything to me and just followed me in silence for quite some time. If there's one thing I know about the old folks here, it's that they start a conversation right away. I'm also pretty sure it wasn't an elderly person, and my mom probably misunderstood because I think I described him as old. But for a little girl, any face over 40 would look old to me. I never thought about it again, but it definitely crossed my mind at times. I actually live in a pretty safe country, Finland, in a very safe area. So sometimes I wonder if maybe I'm just overreacting to the situation. Then again, why does some random old man follow a little girl through the woods for quite some time? All I can say is that this guy was following me because he was up to something. I used to clean a house for a young couple I knew, and the husband worked out of town, and they had 3 very young children. I usually went in once a month or so whenever it got really bad. Now the woman mentioned in advance that some paranormal events are taking place in the house. What she didn't tell me was exactly because she also wanted me to come over at some point and clean the house. Yes, I clean houses, but I also make clearings. She was hoping to get some kind of confirmation that she and her family were picking up. But when I first cleaned for them, I did a walkthrough and didn't feel anything until I went down to the basement. Downstairs was a family room as well as an ensuite bedroom. Her 5-year-old slept in this room and created a total nightmare with a messy bathroom with toothpaste and crayons all over the walls and wet toilet paper all over the floor. Anyway, I felt like something was watching me in the bathroom. It wasn't malicious in any way, just wary, and I also felt like we were being watched in the family room, but it wasn't like the other room, and again, it was just wary. Other than that, the house felt good, completely clean and very positive. The woman confirmed that her daughter also always saw a black man standing in her bathroom, so that was confirmation for them. The woman also once saw a man riding a horse in the living room. The house was actually less than 10 years old, and the whole area was once farmland. A woman once took her kids out of town for a long weekend, but she wanted me to clean. She hid the house keys in the baby wagon in the yard and asked me to be careful to put the keys back in the wagon as it was the only set she had. I went in, cleaned both lower levels, then started upstairs in the master bedroom. I was cleaning the bathroom when I heard people talking at the main entrance. The area was tiled with a grand staircase leading up to the bedroom, so their voices could be heard and were quite loud. I 100% believe they were relatives of the woman at the time, and I heard them talking about her. They called her name and said she was out of town, and it sounded like one woman and 2 men. But one of the men also looked very elderly, so I thought her parents and her grandfather were visiting or something. The woman was the loudest and seemed to be in charge, and I heard them talking about me, and the woman said, "Oh, she is cleaning the house for Sarah." I also heard her say something about the house keys, at which point I placed them next to my purse on the small shelf by the front door. I felt really sad being up there with them standing there talking about me, so I took off my gloves and went downstairs to introduce myself. But when I went downstairs, no one was there. I didn't hear the door close or anything, and I didn't hear it open. The door was also locked, and the craziest thing is that there was supposed to be snow melting on the floor and just some dirt. It was winter, and 3 people entering the house and standing in the front entrance would leave a puddle on the floor. I was surprised and very excited about it all, and I wasn't scared at all. They felt very fatherly and protective of the family, and I was happy to tell my client what I had been through, so I went back upstairs and finished cleaning up. However, when I went to leave, the keys were gone. Now I know exactly why I left them on the shelf next to my purse. In fact, Whoever was downstairs seemed to have seen them too, since he mentioned them. And I ended up spending an extra hour and 45 minutes looking for those damn keys. I called ghosts and prayed to ghosts, got angry at ghosts, tried to bargain with them, but to no avail. I didn't have my client's cell phone number, and only her landline, and the lock was deadlocked, so I couldn't lock it without the keys, and the back door was also deadlocked. I didn't have rooms for relatives, and I was beginning to imagine that I would have to spend the whole weekend staying in this house alone. At this point, I began to feel fear, not wanting to sleep there. And I don't know if it's just me or something, but it felt like maybe they wanted me to stay there or something. Although I searched everywhere and on all 3 levels, under the sofa cushions, in the kitchen drawers and cupboards, in the children's bedrooms where toys and everything. I checked the basement and bathroom thoroughly, and even looked outside where the keys were originally, and was about to give up when I thought to check the basket on the kitchen counter again, and there was bread and rolls in it, and at the bottom of the basket were some old leaflets, and the keys sat neatly on those leaflets, under the bread. At this point, I got a shiver down my spine because I couldn't miss it the first time. I mean, there was a huge sticky flip-flop and a mini Tupperware container on the keychain, and you just couldn't pass it up. Needless to say, I got out of there and locked the door behind me, so relieved that I didn't have to stay there. When I told the woman after she got back, she said they often lose important things. Her husband does too, and it's more than her. She also said that her husband had heard the conversation before, but she had not. I still don't know what happened that day, but when the thought crossed my mind that maybe whoever was there wanted me to stay there, I don't know what it was, but I had this feeling like maybe they're trying to trap me in that house or something. So I'm very skeptical of the paranormal, but this experience really blew me away, so I thought I'd share it. So I lived in a house that had 8 separate apartments. I didn't interact much with the other people in the building, except for the guy who lived next door to me, one of the nicest guys I've ever met, and the guy who lived directly below me. I noticed right away when I moved in that the guy below me was the opposite of a considerate neighbor. He played music at all hours of the night, sometimes 24 hours straight, and honestly I could sleep through a hurricane, and it didn't bother me too much, except it was just really gross. Anyway, I decided to keep the peace and not mention it. The guy who lived next door to me, Gary, came up to me one day and asked if I was okay with the guy below me playing music so loud, because even Gary could hear it in his apartment. I told him it didn't bother me too much, and Gary said he was relieved because he didn't want me to run into the guy myself. I'm a 20-year-old girl, and Gary was in his 50s, so I think he was just looking after me. I asked why, and he said he met a guy years ago at work, and he introduced himself as John, but when he moved into the apartment, he introduced himself as Wes. Gary went back to one of the guys who worked with him to double-check, and he said he was switching between 2 personalities regularly, so he obviously had some kind of personality disorder or something. I'm hardly an expert on this sort of thing, but I heard Wes, which is the name my boyfriend and I ended up using to refer to him, yell a lot, and I wondered if he might be playing music to drown out the voices or something. Maybe I'm off base because, like I said, I'm definitely not an expert or anything. Anyway, one day I find a note taped to the door. Enough of your constant banging. I can't sleep. The handwriting also shows that he's scribbled in rage. Now I was at work from 8 p.m. to 6 p.m., and when I got home, I spent most of the night on the couch. Obviously, I made some tea and went to the bathroom too, but I definitely wasn't knocking the whole time or anything. But Wes took it upon himself to start banging on the roof, my floor, whenever he felt I was being too loud or something. And that's how I know it wasn't me, because he knocked at the most random times when I didn't even move from the couch for over an hour, and sometimes like 4 a.m. when I was in bed for hours. My boyfriend knocked on his door several times, but he just didn't answer. And here, this is where it gets terrible. To be honest, I don't necessarily believe in ghosts, so I never really thought about the strange noises I heard in this apartment. After all, I lived in a building with 7 other people, and in retrospect, my boyfriend said some weird things in his sleep too. But anyway, he's regularly talking random nonsense in his sleep. Although I don't believe in ghosts, I found it very interesting, And I do have a Ouija board that I try sometimes. One night, my boyfriend and I decided to use it too, and we had already used it once in that apartment, but nothing happened. However, this time, boy did it work. It's mostly a transition to random letters that didn't really make any sense, but I still got a weird vibe. I mean, the candles kept flickering, which I know sounds weak, but somehow I had a very strange feeling about the situation. But then the board says find me, so I naturally ask where are you, and it says body wash. Like a complete idiot, I read this and hastily concluded that the board was talking nonsense, said goodbye, and turned on the light. To be honest, I was really scared, and I thought I heard something moving, and I didn't want my boyfriend to see how scared I was because he really believes in ghosts, and I'm always very skeptical about it. It was only later when I sat down on the couch that I realized what it had actually said. Where is the hidden body? When I realized this, I told my boyfriend, whose reaction I found very funny. Nice try. To this day, he thinks I was pushing the board and doing stupid things to make it look realistic too, but I promise I'm not. Out of curiosity, I tried looking up local murders or disappearances, but couldn't find anything. I also can't find any social media for Wes, or anything interesting about him online. I actually managed to find out his real name as well. I still don't know what happened, or why the board said that, and I'm sure there's a logical explanation for it, maybe a subconscious move, but it scared the hell out of me. I actually moved out of that apartment a couple of months ago, and I'm not going to lie, I haven't used a Ouija board since. I don't know if Wes's hidden body implies some kind of murder or something, but I just left it alone for now because it was so weird. The bit holder on the shank of my drill didn't fit, and I remembered that I had a handle mounted over the washer in the cabinet. I went back there, and sitting next to a small set of bits was the fourth damn screw. And it totally amazed me. It was also very strange, and my buddy and I were watching the universe work, and my front door just slowly opened, and no one was around. Mind you, there was no wind, and it didn't open quickly or even slowly. It looked like someone had entered. Since then, we have often seen books just pushed away from the fridge and often heard footsteps,